All right, your humble host is here again. It is April 9th, 2016. Now, just for everybody's clarification, I'm very sure that you'll be hearing this sometime later, but I am making this rare effort to pre-record a show with a gentleman who I have encountered because of my friend Danny pointing me to him, actually. And we're going to discuss some subjects here which are going to be quite diverse and esoteric, and yet quite relatable to the real world and interconnecting with a lot of subjects which we have discussed on the show and elsewhere. Now, the gentleman's name is Bruce Jessop, and here's what I ask the listener to do. Even though most often I will refer to the easily scientifically observable aspects of things, I always try to tell the listener that there is always more to be discovered. There is always more to the story. And I think Mr. Jessop is going to prove that today. So, how are you, sir?
Well, thank you very much, Charles, and I'd like to thank you and American Freedom Radio for this opportunity to share what I think may turn out to be valuable information. This data and information may be significant to some, perhaps old news to others, and it may even be perceived as insane. But in any case, here we go.
Well, you know, a lot of subjects come off that way, and I'm very glad that we're going to do this. Let's begin in the most basic sense. Now, quite honestly, this conversation was kind of provoked because of the discussion of how people were mind controlled and targeted that occurred on my show, and I believe that's what you heard, and you said to the producer and the owner of American Freedom Radio that subject could be taken much further, and that you had a great deal of information to add to the discussion that was had on the show, and that's basically where the story begins, but it is certainly not where it's going to end today.
Yep, that's correct. Your show was very informative, and I felt that I could perhaps share some more information in a different setting or structure, if you wish. So, because initially what we've got here is a rather complex structure to absorb, I'll try to use words to integrate and synthesize a lot of the pieces of basically a cosmic puzzle. And hopefully by the end of this allotted time, we can present a clear picture and a structure. So I thought that perhaps how we could begin this or start this is just reflect on these questions. Do people think and feel things are normal here on Earth? Okay? Because when we look, we can say, well, there's endless wars. It's been on forever. It never changes. Costumes change, weaponry changes, but it just seems to go on and on and on. You've got slavery, you've got famines, you've got global and personal hardships. There's corruption in government, education, which is basically engaged strictly in the becoming process rather than pointing towards beingness. Taxation, religious conflicts. I mean, you can go on and on. Medical field, endless promises of cures and research, and really nothing really ever changes.
Now, what's fascinating about that to me is, and I interject here because these are very key questions. Why are they key questions to me? I'm going to tell you personally, is that I had the hope as a child that mankind, as they increase their knowledge, as we increase our ability to access technology, as we became more interconnected in one way or another, we would settle, we would evolve away from things like structure, from things like systems of domination, And it appears as though no matter what level of technology we reach, no matter what level of enlightenment is available to our species, it is completely counterintuitive to the behavior that is observable. There is no decrease in murder. There is no decrease in rape. There is no decrease in warfare. There is no decrease in tyranny in all various forms. In fact, as the technology, which I had hoped emotionally would free us as a species, and the knowledge level, it should be rising. It is not. The technology is being used. I mean, we all know that technology and any of these advancements, alleged advancements, should be, well, without an agenda. So it is up to us to utilize these things in a positive or a negative way, but we don't seem to be evolving, in a sense, away from our baser instincts. In fact, it seems to be increasing, becoming more perverse and diverse as time goes on. And that's what the way I see it, unfortunately. And yeah,
I was just going to say, and that's the way it actually is.
Yeah. Well, and you might say that my worldview might have something to do with that, but I've got to say that I try and take this as objectively as possible and observe the trends which are emerging. And it's been an interesting time period between the 1970s when I was born and now we sit here, past into the next century, more than a decade and a half. And the technological advancements, the medical advancements, everything that should be here, there is no reason for us to not be striving for a more peaceful, pleasant, and in fact, simply comfortable way of life for everyone on the planet. And yet that has not come to pass at all. In fact, we've gone in the opposite direction.
And it's not meant to be, Charles. And we're going to see why it's not meant to be. And all of what you just said right now and what I alluded to before, it all points to maintaining the populace in duality. It's like dangling a carrot and you can never reach it. Right?
Right.
And that's part of the illusion that we're stuck in, or that the powers that be, which we're going to see in an interesting way today, I think, are dangling that carrot to keep us in hope. And that hope is actually what maintains people's ignorance about some idealistic future. And I don't think it's going to happen here. And I'm not saying this because I'm in a state of depression, but I want to give people a chance to see what a clear picture, perhaps in a slightly different way than what they've been used to see what can really be done about the dilemma that we're in. Because, medically, they've been doing this cancer research with, literally hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in research money. What's changed? Nothing. How long have they've been at it for what, 40, 45 years? There's still no progress. Oh, they say there's progress, but hospitals are full. People are dying of cancer on a daily basis. So all of this illusion that we're getting there, I'm going to show you why today we're not going to get there. Not in this way. There's no possibility of it. So as long as people are maintained or engaged in this duality, there's no way that you can uncover the mechanics and the subtle realities that rule this biosphere. All right? So,
all right.
Does anyone sense, and the key word here is sense, something just isn't right here? Do you have that sense as well?
Well, I certainly do. I feel as though we, again, I use the we to discuss mankind in general, are under a system which I do believe is cosmic in nature, that is meant to govern us and continuously, no matter what efforts the individual has, place us in a position of opposition. In other words, no matter what it is we do, it seems, there will always be a negative faction or a negative movement or a negative semi-natural or artificial way of continuously oppressing us in one way or another to assure that that positive future cannot be realized. I agree with you in that general sense. I don't understand the nature of it fully. People place blame on other people. People place blame on the changing environment. But it seems to me, and I've made this statement, and many people think that this is quite, sort of overly idealistic, but I believe that it is the fact that we have not sought to evolve from within as individuals, that our intent has not been decoupled from the world which we do not rule, and we have not taken our rightful place as the masters of ourselves. And it seems to me as though the negative things which we have continued to contribute to, whether knowingly or unknowingly, come to fruition in the physical realm. But that is virtually as far as I can make the logic work. I'm at a loss to explain the nature of that oppression, the nature of that governing factor that seems to limit progress at all times.
Okay, well, let's see if we can pull the curtain back and peek in there.
Excellent.
Another question I'd have, and when I referred the question to you, obviously it's to the entire listenership. Is it normal that a human lifespan that we take to be our identity should last from anywhere from days to perhaps 60, 70, 80, maybe 90 years? Does that feel normal?
Well, it feels as though it is normal given the conditions that we see here. Is it completely natural if it were not being controlled in some way? No, I don't think so. I think actually we should be capable of a much longer lifespan. But given the conditions, no, that does seem about right. But if we were able to change the conditions and human beings were not being bombarded with as much as they are at this point on this planet, then I would say that unchecked, we should be living a lot longer.
All right. Well, I think as we continue our dialogue here, we're going to take it at some point into looking into what is really a human being. All right. But then I have one more question I'd like to formulate. Again, for the listenership, and perhaps you can respond as you've been doing to this question. Do you believe that there's an infinite universe out there, and the key word being out there?
Well, I see that there are infinite possibilities.
I'm talking physical. I'm talking physical universe.
Oh yeah, but that's the thing. Physical universe. See, that to me needs to be defined as well, because that which is physical is also that which can be imagined to me as well. It seems to me as though when one places enough energy into nearly anything, over time, that often comes to fruition. See, that's kind of the odd sticking point I come to, where I feel as though some of the negativity, some of the damage being done is actually materialized in a way by the will of individuals. And I believe that that is a provable thing, that if there is enough effort to bring something about, based on individuals feeding it in a psychological and emotional way, often those things will come to pass. So therefore, to me, there is limitless possibilities. Now, the infinite universe, I do feel as though we are at this point in time somehow segregated from it. And this sounds almost like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth, right? But I believe that both things are true. I believe that there's an infinite amount of possibility. There is the idea that that space, time, and many other things are limitless, but we are sort of closed off from that at this time as a species.
Very interesting that you should use the words closed off. Okay, and we'll get to that in a minute. Just before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, I wanted to talk about how I at one time had hoped that there could be some sort of an awakening in something that's very obvious, which is the subject matter of chemtrails. And the purpose of mentioning that is not to get into that specifically, because there are people that have researched it and are far more capable of the detail of that that I'm able to. But I was hoping that the chemtrails would potentially wake enough people up to create some sort of a critical mass, because chemtrails is something that you can observe. All you have to do is look up, and on an almost daily basis, or certainly a number of times a week, there's a disruption of the sky that I used to remember, that was blue, puffy white clouds. And now it's become just a sick mixture of a light blue with a grayish film that seems to permeate the sky practically on a permanent basis. And something struck me about when I first became aware of chemtrails about well over a dozen years ago. I'd say probably even late 90s. And I was watching with the kids a Disney CD or a DVD that we had purchased, and it was a cartoon type. And then I noticed in the cartoon chemtrails. And I'm thinking, you see, already they're programming minds to see the unnatural as natural. So already that programming took place, and you can, I don't remember exactly the title of the movie, but it was about some animals that came across some sort of a wood, and then they came into a little society. And anyways, it was in that movie. Perhaps some listeners will remember what that was. But in any case, that sort of gave me an awakening to how manipulated we are via the media, what we hear, etc.
Well, I want to interrupt you here, and I'm going to try and limit my interruptions as you go further from now on. But I want you to know that your discussion about chemtrails is almost word for word. I mean, I know you've listened to a couple of my shows, but I'm going to tell you it's almost word for word exactly what I've said about them, that, all we have to do is get people to look up and to recognize. And you literally used most of the terms which I have been using for years, trying to explain, discuss, and in fact, sort of alarm people in a gentle way about what is going on over their heads. I find it fascinating also that you mentioned this cartoon which had the chemtrails in it, because I have also almost word for word on a separate subject, they tried to explain that there is a normalization process which is utilized in media all the time, but not only in media, in pop culture, in various ways. For instance, they not only do they give you cartoons for children that normalize things ahead of their existence, but also things like the toy helicopters, which came out just before drones became a lot more accessible.
Yep.
to people. So this way, and people would say, well, look, that's just kind of really coincidental, and that's a bit of a reach, but not to me, because what that normalizes is not the drones per se, but the concept that little tiny flying things are innocuous. They're most likely toys, you see.
Yep.
So if you get the public used to the idea that children could be flying little helicopters and little hovercrafts and things, well, it's just a toy. Despite the fact that drones are utilized for surveillance, weapons, etc., now you have made people a lot more comfortable with tiny flying inorganic objects, haven't you?
Yeah.
You know, and that's just one example, Bruce, but what I'm saying is you and I are quite a bit on the same page here.
Well, it's interesting because, no, I have not heard those shows because I was just introduced to your network very recently, and I've actually only had the opportunity to listen to the one show, which was that lady that I mentioned that came on about mind control and implants. So I think it's very, very obvious that something's not right. And you're entirely correct in saying that how media, Hollywood, etc., controls and prepares, I think, the mindset of people for things to come. I'll give you an example. A series that I had watched through 24. I don't know if you're familiar with it. The series 24?
Oh, certainly. I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, okay. So if you remember in the very beginning, there was a black president, right? In the beginning, the first years of the show?
Right.
Okay. This is before Obama.
Well, you know, even before that, the actor Morgan Freeman had been portraying the President of the United States. People made a little bit of a notice about that. Hey, look, there is a black man playing president, which, you know, as odd as this may sound to some other people in some other countries, that was quite an interesting idea to the American public, for certain. I don't know how big of a deal that might have been in other countries, but I've got to say that that in this country, that was certainly a new and sort of very progressive-looking idea. Now, we'll put that aside because we don't want to get bogged down in politics, for sure. But, you know, one last thing, like I said, and I want to mainly let you speak here today and really get into it, but I wanted to give the context back and forth with us, and I'm very glad.
I appreciate the exchange because each thing will fall into place, so it's great.
Right, and of course, this, as always, is unscripted. We did not script or choreograph what we're discussing here today, but you can see how it's naturally emerging together.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: not only in an observable sense would you say that there is something very wrong with sort of the emerging historical arc of events, but on a gut level, I've got to tell you that in the course, again, of my lifetime, many times people in recent years have told me that not only has there always been something wrong, have they always now, you know, they realize in some way or other that they have always been deceived in a general sense, and they found that out in one way or another. And I have an interesting personal story about how that first emerged for me, and almost everyone that I encounter in some way or other has that idea that they have been betrayed by the information and the observable around them. Not only that, but even when people get away from that idea, you also find that sort of on an instinctive level, they feel as though something is very, very out of order. And I don't necessarily mean those who believe in conspiracy theories only, or those who are outside of the mainstream. Even people who are mainstream in their religious beliefs and actually think that the TV doesn't lie to them and all of that, they even say in some way or other that in recent years, they feel as though something is just wrong with the world around them. Now, some of them place it in the context of Christianity and it's the final days. Some of them place it into a more quote unquote new age kind of way, and they see a shift which is going to be transitional in nature. Things are about to change because there is a pressure. There is something which is emerging now as you and I speak, Bruce. And you can find that across the board, no matter what their true level of awareness is in the world around them. It seems as though even on a gut level, people are becoming aware at this point that something is, well, amiss.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I sense it more strongly now than ever before. And I've been around for a while. I'm almost 68 years old now, and things seem to be increasing in a type of pressure. And I think that part of what we're going to get into as we continue will give a rather interesting perspective as to what may actually be going on. Just to finish on 24, I just wanted to mention that later in the show, in the years, in the episodes, later episodes, that then a woman president was introduced, which is interesting as Hillary Clinton is going into it. But anyways, this it was just a comment I wanted to finish, and it connects with what you mentioned. It's almost as if we're living out a script on behalf of these script writers, and they introduce it via television, which is very popular, radio, etc. And as far as conspiracy theories go, it's interesting that conspiracy is about 50% right in the sense that it's a conspiracy, but it's not a theory.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
That is where the objectionable vocabulary comes in. The concept that it's a theory. Truth is that human nature in and of itself is that we are collaborative. We do work together. And the meaning of the word conspiracy, despite the other connotations that have been ascribed to it, is merely, from the Latin meaning to breathe together. So it is a collaborative word, and it is human nature to collaborate. Truthfully, the idea of a lone wolf, as they like to call it, in behavior, when you're looking at difficult things or terrible things that happen, is an anomaly beyond belief. So the truth is, no matter what, there is in our own nature the fact that we work together. This is what we do. So no matter what the goal is. And truthfully, it is also a legal term, which does say that more than one person was working toward a particular end. Generally speaking, in a criminal sense, how many criminals, commit their crimes wholly by themselves? Most people do not. They generally work with someone in some way, and that, by definition, is a conspiracy. Period. Yep. Even if you get together and decide that you're going to approach with some friends to get something as simple as a stop sign changed in your town, in a literal sense, you have now entered into a conspiracy with others to effect a change. And this is a very innocuous thing, obviously, I'm talking about, but one could say that in its purest form, that's what a conspiracy is. And it's quite natural. So I dismiss that term as benign anyway. To say that it is theory means to undermine it.
Yeah.
And they mean to say that you have no evidence to back it. See, if you only have a theory, you can have a theory about anything, and you don't necessarily have to prove it. You just have to sort of relate it to reality in some way or other, and you can make a theory about anything. So therefore, they're saying that it is a work of the imagination by utilizing the word theory. Now, I consider myself more of a conspiracy analyst because I do not theorize so much. Unless I have gaps in information, I may theorize how they are connected, and then I search to see if there is a feasible way that they are connected. But truthfully, individuals who discuss this most of the time are not theorists in any way, shape, or form. They are merely analyzing existing evidence, and well, some people do it better than others. That's all there is to it. So I that's how I break down that term, and I'm willing to bet that you're not going to disagree with anything I just said.
No, I find it a very convenient way of negating a potential truth.
And that is the short answer on it.
Yep.
But I think that's precisely correct, sir.
All right. So let's move into let's conspire to move into the nitty-gritty of this.
Yes, because it does just take two or more people, and since you and I are collaborating to do so, we are now engaged in a conspiracy.
All right.
There you go.
Yeah,
we're engaged in a conspiracy to pull that curtain back and enlighten people to some things they may not have considered.
All right. Well, here we go. So I think it should be an interesting ride now.
Okay.
We've set it up fairly well. So before we get into it more deeply, I'd like to make a statement and just request the listeners to reserve an opinion or reactions they'll have to the following until the end of our discussion. What if I said that the Earth we're living on is an enclosed, electromagnetically controlled biosphere? Sort of the end of the line, so to speak. And that there is no out there, no universe, as we've been trained and brainwashed into believing. I'm going to use some terms here for the listeners that some of them may be familiar with. I'm sure there are synonyms to these words, but for the sake of trying to clarify a picture, we can use these terms. Astral plane frequency. We can say it's a frequency that is outside the normal range or capacity of human perception on Earth. The other one I would like to use is causal plane, which is yet a finer or subtler frequency than the astral. And finally, the causal is manifest creation out of, let's use the term source. So in source comes an initial vibration. That vibration has been expressed in various ways. You've probably heard the term, the word in the beginning was the word.
Right.
Yeah. In other traditions, it's been spoken of as a primordial sound. Some Eastern traditions refer to it as Om. Without this primordial active frequency sound, there's no manifest creation possible. It's the foundation of all material worlds, from the subtlest to the end of the line, which is Earth. And Earth is the grossest field or lowest frequency. It can't get denser or more opaque than what we live in now. Otherwise, it's complete stagnation. So what I'm sharing with you is not book knowledge, but it's a repeated direct experience that's given me a clear blueprint of creation, both manifest and unmanifest. Now, we have to keep in mind that within the source is the causal, and that envelops the astral, in which the Earth biosphere is presently residing in. That's my sort of general blueprint of it. And the Earth biosphere is a select area of the astral, and you could say that it's suspended and rests in the astral. And I think one of the ways that when I've spoken with several people to try and illustrate and imagine how this could be, let's say that we're in an enormous hall, which is representative of the astral plane. And in a certain section of this hall, there's a very, very large aquarium. That would be our Earth biosphere. So from our perspective, we'd be able to view within the aquarium all of its contents, the vegetation, its inhabitants, etc. We could also control from that perspective the content of the aquarium. This is where the human as in human being story begins as we know it presently. So, basically we're stuck in a biosphere that's controlled from outside of our dimension, our physical dimension. And I know that a lot of people have laughed at the concept of a flat Earth theory, and I don't negate it in any way, because the representation of what I've seen is in some ways similar to that. And we are enclosed with an electromagnetic dome. We're enclosed within that. So I just wanted to set up a type of structure because, as you may or may not know, I was a co-producer of a documentary film called Fast Walkers, where we got into UFOs. And as I dug in deeper and deeper, I spoke to a lot of military people, science advisors to presidents of the United States, and I got a lot of interesting information off the record. And I wasn't able to include that in the initial in the initial production, but it engaged me in another direction, because I realized that UFOs don't come from out there. They don't come from what we appear to look into as the universe. It's actually the end of the line, because even if we came out of the aquarium, you'd end up in an inner dimension. So there is no universe as such. I've coined it, for the sake of understanding, the innerverse. So going into space doesn't really happen in the way that people think it happens. You're actually going into inner space, into subtler realms. But outside the aquarium, there is no out there. It's a complete brainwash direction that keep people in what you might call the becoming process, the attaining process, because you can never reach it. Isn't it strange that after, what has it been now, since 1970, 45 years, 46 years, that they've never gone back to the moon? I guess they probably dismantled the studio that they created that in. I don't believe that they've been to the moon in the way that we think they've been. There is a moon, but it's an entry point, just as the sun is, into the inner world, the astral plane. And I would take it a step further, and I viewed this, you could call it remote viewing, but I think it's a little more than a remote viewing, because I learned this technique over 45 years ago through some Indian texts, and practiced it and had a facility to go into the inner world and see the structure of the universe and how it manifests from the unmanifest right up to the physical plane. And basically what I'm telling you is what I would consider to be first-hand knowledge. It's not book knowledge. It's what I've viewed and I've seen. And I can tell you that from the perspective of viewing it from outside the aquarium, that there are a number of other types of aquariums or biospheres spread around our planet Earth, our biosphere Earth, if you wish. And there are various types of humanoids in these other ones. So I had some really good friends in Holland, Ronald and Suzanne. And Ronald is an intuitive, as Suzanne is, but he has a certain perception where he's taken UFO film footage and he's actually able to peel with a program that he uses to peel, and you can actually see beings inside the UFOs. It's not as clear as a studio portrait, but clear enough that you can definitely distinguish various forms. So a UFO doesn't come from a universe or solar system. It comes from the innerverse. And he actually had an experience of a UFO that was perhaps 10 meters above his head. That's like maybe 30 feet, somewhere in there. And he saw it as a plasma field. But when it gained the frequency at which we're operating in our biosphere, it turned metallic.
Right. Well, in a very shorthand way, it appears to me, based on my observations, that when we are discussing these concepts of aliens and what was earlier described by mankind as the demonic or supernatural, all of this is related in that it is much less an interstellar operation and more of an interdimensional operation.
Yeah, exactly.
In other words, there are many things which in this very same space, in fact, seem to exist, but because they are at a different frequency, they are not necessarily readily perceivable by you or I utilizing our senses in the most conventional way. So simply because you cannot see it in that space, or you cannot see that it is occupying the very same space that you are, does not mean that it doesn't. It simply means that you can pass things like electricity across a physical object, and yet both of them do exist simultaneously. I'm using that as an example, mind you.
That's a good example.
But it does not mean that one or the other does not exist, because the electricity may travel far away from the generator and along a wire, and it is not something that you see necessarily happening all the time, but it is. So in a way, it is energy being transferred without you being able to see it most of the time. And I think that that is an oversimplification of what is happening here. And it seems to me as though a lot of times when people talk about demons or talk about, other species masquerading as men, or even alien visitation, what they're actually seeing is a conjunction of the different frequencies coming together. Simply because you tune a radio station to a particular place does not mean that you can't receive more than one broadcast on that particular frequency. So it does happen, and I think some of it may be intentional, some of it may be unintentional, that these things become observable. But clearly, to me, there is a whole lot more going on in the space right before your and my very eyes than our eyes perceive at all times. What do you think of that?
Well, I'd have to agree with it. One of the it's a difficult concept to grasp, because we're so used to having seen our planet, for instance. Most people imagine planet Earth as a round ball that spins around, etc. I made research. Like, I had a lot of friends. I used to visit the Soviet Union in the old days because I was a sports photographer, and I did a lot of hockey photography, and I met a lot of interesting people in both the KGB and the Red Army, and some remained friends. And I contacted some of them when I started getting into the perspective of what this biosphere that we lived in. And a friend of mine challenged me to try and prove that the Earth was round. And other than believing the CGI graphic data from NASA, I wasn't able to do it. But yet, using the perspective of the so-called flat earthers, there's a number of ways that you can show that it is indeed not round. So for me, that was like an issue that was fairly significant, because the next question would be, okay, let's assume, or not assume, but let's verify that this is actually true. What would be the next question? Well, the next question would be, where are the edges? You know,
Right.
what's on the other side? And that's precisely what I'm saying when I call Earth an enclosed aquarium or biosphere, because the other side is actually the inner side of things. It can't go further than planet Earth. It doesn't become more opaque. And there's no out there, there's only in there. And when you create the concept of a round Earth, no matter where you go, you end up in the same place. Correct?
Well,
And
yeah, I see what you're saying. But for me, it is hard to grasp, and not because of the CGI'd, you know, not because of that, but because of those who have traveled quite a bit and tell me, you know, that they can travel in what they perceive to be a straight line, and they do seem to, you know, you can circumnavigate the thing. It appears. Now, as far as the shape goes, I've got to say that I don't know the shape of the Earth entirely. I don't assume it to be a spherical shape, but I also find it very difficult to believe that it is entirely flat, because, as you said, where would the edges be, and why has no one actually fallen off or gone
you can't,
onto the other
can't,
side or come back?
because
You know?
you can't fall off and you can't go up. That's why there's been virtually no progress in space travel. And we're talking 45 years ago, they were on the moon. They
Right.
haven't been on there since. Okay? That's why I said the studio closed up shop. That's why they haven't been up there again.
Mm.
And if you and I spoke to a friend of mine just recently. He was a MiG pilot, and I asked him, when he flew, did they ever have to adjust? Because if you do the trigonometry of a round Earth, it means that every minute you'd have to adjust to about, from memory, about 1,000 feet. You'd have to come down 1,000 feet. He said no. They maintain the same altitude. Well, if you flew for some hours, you'd fly off. You'd fly off the Earth. You'd go into space, if that was the case.
Well, if you're traveling in a perfectly straight line, yeah, physically, what you're saying is, if it is a sphere, if one were to imagine, just take a ball of any kind, and then begin to make any object travel in a straight line, even beginning from the base anywhere on the sphere, eventually, if you maintain a very straight trajectory, yeah, you would have to go away from the sphere,
And yet there's
unless you adjust it, right?
Yeah, and there is no adjustment. Okay, I asked them very, very specifically, and there is no adjustment. So, anyways, like I said, that wasn't really where I wanted to go, but I wanted to mention it because perhaps people, your listenership, can do a little bit of research, or you know, there's some people that have done far more research on it than I have, but it fits in very well with what I've seen in my inner travels, that it is in fact an aquarium type of setting.
Mm.
Now, how do we arrive at believing this kind of thing? That's the key point I wanted to get to.
Okay.
And you have to keep in mind that within the source, like I said before, is the causal, and the causal envelops the astral, and the Earth's biosphere is presently residing in this astral environment. Okay? And the boundaries are delineated with various sets of frequencies. So it's really a select area in the astral, and that's where this biosphere is suspended and rests. So that to me is a very, very key type of perspective. And humans have been sequestered in this frequency biosphere as a slave species and as prisoners. Because when I look into human history and I observe today what's going on in the world, now we may be living in the heaven part of this prison. In the United States, a lot of people have some hardships, but certainly not like a lot of the 50 plus countries I've traveled to. And we don't really realize the depth of suffering that we don't experience on a daily basis, perhaps in another way, that the majority of this planet is living in. And as prisoners of this planet, you have to ask, how is it that we become tricked into believing that everything is okay? Do you remember when we started the show, I asked the question, despite all of these things, medical, chemtrails, all of these circumstances, how is it that we can't get out of this mindset? And the reason we can't get out of this mindset is that, I'm going to give you another perspective to introduce what I'm hoping will be the reason why we think the way that we do, and why there is no chance for any type of progress here unless we can discover that we're prisoners here, and it's not going to get any better. The key point is, what is a human form? And what's the origin of a human form? And in order to arrive at that, again, I have to go back to source, causal body, and within this causal energy or this causal body, it's a very, very vast frequency, far greater and far vaster than both the astral and certainly our little cubicle here called planet Earth. Yeah. And within each one, like, have you ever seen these Russian dolls where you open one, there's a smaller one, etc.?
Right, of course.
Yeah, they fit one inside the other.
Right.
You could say that it's a little bit like that. The structure of the universe is, the basic structure of the universe is infinity. And when infinity begins to manifest, there's that initial sound, that primordial sound. And that primordial sound is a friction. And that sound is the basis of the structure of all matter, subtle and gross, in the universe. If that sound stopped for an instant, everything would collapse. There'd be no more matter anywhere, nothing to recognize. So this sound creates a what would you call it? Not a frequency yet. It's more a rubbing, if you want. The sound creates a rubbing feeling, and light is created. And in that light, various structures, depending on their frequencies, start to materialize. And that's what becomes the causal society. And there are societies very much like societies that we live here on Earth, but in a different material type of structure. There are individuals, but in that causal society is what I call the bliss society. There's no duality in there. Everything is harmonious. And as you go, as this frequency modifies and changes and goes lower and lower into an astral frequency, and I'm not a biblical scholar or anything close to that, but I do remember some of the stories of the fallen angels, for instance. And I took those fallen angels as them being sequestered from the bliss society because they were being lowered in frequency and disrupting the wholeness or the globality of consciousness. So they were sequestered within the astral plane. And within that astral plane, there are societies, and this is where you see the planets and the Hubble telescope. All of these things, that's looking into inner space. It's not looking into outer space. It's the inner world. And it's very, very vast. And yes, there are light years between this and that, but the mode of traveling there is very, very different than what we imagine it to be here, because everything is so opaque and slow. And I believe that humans are fallen angels that wanted to go back to the causal field, to that frequency. And when these fallen angels, if you wish, the ones that chose to separate from that totality, they created electromagnetic fields around these astral bodies and implanted them. And I'm getting to that because I've verified this scientifically as well. Most humans are implanted first in their electromagnetic fields, which is a casing, a type of prison, and somehow placed into a human form at some point. And the DNA is simply a receiver mechanism that receives from the electromagnetic prison that we're encased in prior to the physical form with a master implant. And there are sub-implants in there. And the master implant is sent as a frequency into the DNA, and the DNA at some point translates information that's received both as feeling, emotion, and finally as mind stuff. And this brings me to say that human identity, as we know it, is nothing more than the signals that you're receiving from this master implant. And I've seen this implant, and I think if you look into, are you familiar with Carlos Castaneda at all?
I can't say that I am, no.
Okay, well, he was an anthropologist, and he ended up with so-called sorcerers, and he became an apprentice. And these sorcerers had the ability to see the inner world. And they talked about this implant, this master implant, which I've seen personally, but you can view it only from the inner world. But I have a device that I use here that was created by a very, very brilliant person in England. His name is Victor Sims, and he works with his partner Sharon, and he has a very, very clear perception of the blueprint of creation. And he created a device that I use here that is able to detect not only a huge, huge variety of physical ailments that are in the becoming process, but also these implants that I'm speaking about. And I've had a lot of success treating people that have had some psychological difficulties or emotional problems by applying this device that neutralizes and starts to peel away some of these implants. Electromagnetic field implants, not the physical implants that we hear about, the chips, which are also that also exist, but I believe that those are probably more of a military agenda. Although some of them could be, but I'm not sure on this. So it could be from the electromagnetic field, and somehow they take on a physical form at some point. But these implants are very, very, very real. And the key point here is the master implant. And the master implant, in effect, is what you take yourself to be as a human being, but you're far greater than that. And that's part of the illusion that all human beings have been implanted and chipped electromagnetically, and people mistaken their after the death, for instance, when the physical body falls off, you're still stuck in what people call a soul, but it's in fact the second prison that you have to come out of. It's called it's an electromagnetic field, and I know that the Tibetans and the Egyptians used to speak about that. So at the death, that you would remain conscious, so as not to get it sucked into all of the impressions that you were stuck in, and start to identify with this electromagnetic body that people think is the soul. The soul is far greater than that. It's at an entirely different frequency. So not only do we have the illusion of being a someone or a something on planet Earth, but we have to also transcend, if you wish, the identity to this electromagnetic field, which is fed via this master implant.
All right. Well, that being the case, does that mean that you are, as you speak, okay, let's just use you personally as an example. You are not only imprisoned in the physical sense, but in a singular electromagnetic field, which is exclusive to your being. But at the same time, there is yet the outer walls of that prison, which is much like the aquarium you're talking about. And all of these things are limitations. Almost in the physical world, one could say, look, there are leg shackles, and there are handcuffs, and then there are the prison walls, and then outside of the prison walls, there is still yet a fence. Is this kind of the concept that that could be relatable to this?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there is a way out.
Bruce Jessop is my guest today on the second hour of the Ochelli Effect as we are pre-recording. It is the 9th day of April, 2016. Not sure when you're hearing this, but we do appreciate you for listening and taking the time, and hopefully this will expand your way of thinking about a great many things today. It seems as though we've gone into some pretty sort of far out there territory in a way, but at the same time, maybe we've just gone deeper inside. So, Mr. Jessop, back to it. Before we go any further, I want to give you the opportunity to point people to any website, or obviously you mentioned the documentary. I'd like you to mention that again, maybe tell people where they can find that. But also if you have any sort of website or any other reference material, either related to this subject or something close to it, or anything like that, please go ahead and interject that now, because I know I'll forget as this conversation goes further. Okay. to have you do that, and I'd really appreciate it right now. First, that documentary's name again?
Yeah, the documentary, it's called Fast Walkers. The website for that, I guess, is fastwalkers.com. This is the UFO. We actually won some awards and beat out a couple of Hollywood films on that one. So we were pretty proud of that production. And there's some good information in there. I believe the film might be available online. Co-produced with Robert Miles, and we had a lot of fun putting it together. It was a lot of work and research. And his son also was a very, very important part of the film, because he did a lot of the editing, the legwork, some of the filming in Washington, and so it was fairly complex to put together, but it turned out reasonably well, and I think a lot of people have appreciated it.
Right, and it's just like it sounds, Fast Walkers, but all one word, .com, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The other website, if they're interested in the work that I'm doing with these implants, electromagnetic field implants, I don't really talk about it on this website, but I have a small practice along with a couple of people. It's an alternative health practice, and I'm into more of the psychophysiological part, and it's called safespace.eu for Europe. Safespace.eu.
All right, and that again is two words into one, safespace.eu, right?
Correct.
All right.
Okay. So in any case, I didn't I didn't anticipate a plug for any of these things. That wasn't my purpose of coming here, but more to find now, how do we get out of this dilemma? Okay.
Well, right. As we were going with the discussion, we had just gotten to the descriptive where I sort of related this to the concept, because you used the word prison more than once. So I figured it was worthy of thinking about it if one were a prisoner in a prison complex and one were shackled. So therefore you have leg shackles, you're handcuffed. This is one way of restricting one's movement, of relegating someone immobile. And then you have a prison cell and a prison building. These are different layers, and we can even go further to say that there is a fence around the prison. And what you've discussed here is that there is the physical body, which is sort of an imprisonment. There is an electromagnetic field, which is an imprisonment. There is the fish tank, which is the biosphere which we observe around us, which is a type of prison. And even if one were to get out of the fish tank, there is that great hallway you were talking about, which is also still something that is segregated from other things. So therefore, it seems to me as though you've described in a metaphysical sense the layers of being imprisoned that one could experience, in the day-to-day world around us, except this is even more complex, obviously, and it's sort of an oversimplification, but it could be related in this way, I think.
Yeah, there is a way out. I mean, a friend of mine, when I was speaking with him last week in Switzerland, referred to it as an electronic jailbreak, which I thought was fairly clever, and it's actually not far from the truth. This master implant is basically an assembly point, and that assembly point is everything that you think you are, but in fact you are not. And that's the dilemma that a so-called human being is stuck in, is their freedom identity, their blissful identity, if you wish, is lost in mind and feeling only. You're the knower of mind and feeling, but in fact you're not really the mind and feeling. You can actually say that emotions, and if I'm silent here, it's because I have to take a moment of inner sensing so that the right words come out.
Oh no, take your time, certainly,
Yeah.
because this is a bit difficult for me to comprehend. Honestly, I'm starting to think that what you're describing could, again, and I try and relate things to that which is easily perceived. You could think of it as an operating system for a computer. Now, let's not get too complex about it, but here's the thing. A computer is a machine capable of a great many things. When it's given an operating system, though, although this does allow it to communicate with the world around it, it doesn't give it limitless possibilities. I mean, as I speak, I'm on one of these machines that utilizes, Windows and this kind of thing, so it's a PC, right? But this machine cannot even begin to speak to an Apple machine because of their operating systems. The hardware is not necessarily different and actually could probably do a great many other things if a different operating system were introduced. Is that sort of what we're talking about when it comes to the implant? As if the implant were like an operating system, which does give you the potential for interaction, but also at the same time creates limitations and restrictions?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay.
The master implant gives you a false identity. And what's inside the implants is all dual in nature. When in fact, a human being, all they look for throughout their whole lives is to regain that sense of wholeness. Okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people go about it the wrong way. They're looking into objects, into things for their fulfillment, but objects and things never hold their promise.
Well, see, and I see others that chase after relationships, connectivity. I am, in fact, guilty of that. I seek to connect to others. This, to me, is a valuable pursuit. A little bit different than seeking what I perceive as materialistic.
Well, if that connection points to wholeness, then that's perfect. But you see, in most relationships, people enter relationships with some expectations and some needs to have fulfilled. And it doesn't really work perfectly that way because then becomes a demand. And
Right.
you're looking for it in someone else to fill your holes when in fact you already own that wholeness. So if two people came together from the perspective of wholeness, it would be extremely fulfilling. Okay?
Right.
I mean, that would be the ultimate relationship. But if you come in from a perspective of need, once the passion goes down, what people call love is usually a passion, because for me, love is wholeness. It's not something that you do, it's something that you are.
Well, this is true, certainly, and I have that struggle explaining to people all the time that that love is not passion. You can be passionate in love in a way, but that sort of influx there, I think, is more of an instinctive thing that seems to be generated despite whatever the programming is that's been introduced by this implant, because I seem to have this idea in my mind that we are by our design, and I don't mean our physical designs, although our physical designs do point to this in the way that we are manifest. We are meant to be interconnected with one another. So I think that this is part of our true nature, to be interconnected.
Yeah.
I think we're meant to be part. Well, see, now I hate to use this term, but I think we're meant to be collective in nature. I think we are meant to be collaborative, and there goes that word again. That almost sounds like conspiracy, but hey, you know what? It seems to be a part of our true nature. Not that which has been impressed upon us by either the implant or other influences. I think that is part of the truth of life and love also, which are pretty much the same thing on some levels as well.
Well, I can't dispute that because what you've said is quite accurate. Our true nature is a fullness. It's non-dual in nature, if you wish.
Mm.
And yes, people fear collectivity, but it's not an individual collectivity. It's an essence. And as you come down in lower frequencies, especially this one, uh, you get fractalized, if you wish. Everything becomes a fraction. And
Right.
you lose, because the mind has its limitations. You see, the mind can never understand who you are essentially. The mind can only understand objects and define them. But what we are essentially is not an object, it's not a thing. So you can't define it. So you could even say that you can never know who you are because you are. So
Right.
it's not something that can be known intellectually. It just is. It's an isness, a beingness. And beingness can't know itself um, in a fractional way. It's a
Well,
totality.
well, not only that, but I think the limitation of our language skills, of our linguistic abilities, is also something which needs to be added here. I think that even if one does fully experience the self, that there would be no linguistics in existence at this moment that are knowable to most, or to all of us, in fact, that would be able to express that. I
There would
think
be
that,
no need. There would be no need for an expression because you're living it.
well, because yeah, that was my next point. Is that in fact the reason for that? I mean, but that would be the case. You would have no way to express that in the languages that exist because it in fact is the expression.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay, I'm
So
just making sure.
you've got a good handle on it because it's not a simple um, subject for the mind.
Right.
Because basically you have to transcend mind and emotion in order to arrive at who you are essentially. Because if that wholeness wasn't there prior to birth, you wouldn't know that you are.
Right. The expression of life in and of itself comes from that.
Except that what we're discussing here and what the point was is that I would have to go beyond saying belief because it's not a belief, it's more of a knowingness
Mm.
that this frequency is not necessary. And at some point, if there was enough awareness, collective awareness, this frequency would disappear.
Mm.
Because it's a frequency of duality only. And there's a reason why it's maintained that way.
Well, you've
It's like
said you've said duality several times. I wonder if you could explain what it is you mean by that in a real simple way, because I'm sure that many people interpret that in different ways. So I wonder if you could sort of define that for us.
okay. I would express duality in this way that any mind stuff that takes you away from your sense of fullness is dual in nature. So, in other words, mind is what fractionalizes totality because it analyzes, it describes, it can coexist with beingness for practical purposes. But knowing your wholeness is independent of mind and emotion.
Okay, so since you are occupied with mind and emotion, and you are also seeming to have one foot in wholeness or the fullness of that, this is what you mean by duality. You're kind of straddling the two ways of expression, in a sense.
You see, relativity exists within totality.
Okay.
And at a very, very advanced perception, you could say that that totality also exists in relativity. In the sense that every object of perception would become, you'd have the perception to see the absolute, if you wish, the source and each object of perception. But there's a ways to go before that's a living possibility. And I think the way out, in a very gross sense, is that until you realize that something is not right here, that it doesn't make sense, and you're always driven to the exterior, always driven in a becoming process, and until the attention is reversed from projection to injection, there's no chance that this world can change. And that's why I introduced some of the obvious things in the very beginning, that first question, when we looked at what's wrong with education, chemtrails, sickness, old age. None of that stuff makes sense. You can say, yeah, well, that's life. Sure, it's life here, but I know life other than that. And in order to go back to that wholeness, that collaboration, if you wish, that you spoke of, there's no way that it can be found outside. And everything here in this prison planet is geared to maintain the attention and duality into a striving that you can never catch, into promises that never keep their promises. So ultimately what I'm suggesting is that there's a way out. And that way out is back in. Because out does not exist. It's an illusion. It's been created that way because as long as there's an out there, that's where people's minds are gonna remain, in a very cosmic sense, and also in a practical sense. If you look at how people live, we're always trying to regain our totality, that sense of fulfillment, that sense of happiness or joy. Yeah,
right.
And there's a big difference between joy and pleasure. Pleasure is conditional on something. Joy is the expression of your own self. And that's what I meant in engaging in relationships where it's only pleasure. If it's only pleasure, it never holds its promise. And then you'll move on to the next object or subject.
Right.
So that's why I approached in I think a practical sense, that once you see that something here is just not right, that this will be the beginning of the quest. But other than that, if you think everything is normal and it is as it is, well, what can I say? But I think there are enough people out there, as we spoke in the beginning of your show, that people are sensing something's not right, something's missing. What is it? And it's nothing material. It's not that you need a bigger house or you need more cars or more money. In some cases, yes. But the nature of the illusion of this planet, the controllers of this planet, the royalties, the governments, they're the wardens of this planet. And I'd always wondered for a long time in these secret societies how they could make plans for hundreds and hundreds of years ahead of time and go with the agenda. And I sensed inside that part of the reason for that was that as they maintain the suffering and duality structure of this biosphere, in exchange for that, they get the perks. They've got the riches and like the ski resorts and the boats and whatever to maintain the prison. So they act basically, for me, royalties and these so-called Illuminatis and controllers of the planet, to me, are the wardens. They're the wardens of the prison.
Well, more accurately, they would be the trustees.
Or trustees, yeah.
Because what happens here, they're here as well. They're not immune.
But have you ever asked? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Have you ever asked the question of what is it that makes them take that role on as a trustee or a warden? And what I came up with
yeah.
is that
Mhm.
in exchange for that, for maintaining that suffering, which is the fumes or the cocaine of these interdimensional beings, some of them have referred to them as archons or jinns,
Right.
these aliens, if you wish, whatever
Sure.
name you want to give them, doesn't really matter. They're just entities that need to maintain a confusion. They need to maintain a suffering element and a duality element. And the reason for that is that that's their cocaine. That's what they sniff, if you wish. They live, it's a frenzy feed on their part to have it. And you can see it escalating. And we're about to go into, I don't know what, but I really sense that we're about to hit some sort of a turning point, and it won't necessarily be for the better, because I just don't think at this time that there are enough people to reach a critical mass so that a change in consciousness or awareness of what it is that we're living in can take place. Some people are perhaps more optimistic than me. I don't know. But what I observe is that there's still far, far too much ignorance about what's going on. I'll give you a simple example. Most people, you look at the news, and people feel an empathy and a compassion for all of the refugees that are coming into Europe. I don't know how it is in the U.S., but in Europe, it's turning into a tremendous negative element. Not that there's no compassion for the suffering of those people, because yeah, it is a suffering. But when you widen the angle, instead of zooming in just on that, and you zoom back and look at it from a wide angle view, the same people that are taking in these refugees hand over fist are the same ones that created the wars in the first place. So when you look at it very clearly, this was an agenda that was set up a long time ago, because they knew that if they created wars in those countries, that eventually the people would have to flee. They could put in their terrorists as part of the people that are fleeing. And if you look at photos and videos, and I've seen them at the train stations here in Germany, that most of them are fairly young men, very few families. So obviously the agenda is to create an internal chaos so that at some point they can say, okay, now we're creating a police state or a martial law. And this is happening very, very quickly.
Well, right. It's like describing the purpose of the Hegelian dialectic is simply to continuously add to the pressure and to create the misery and the bloodshed and the pain on one level or another, which I was having this conversation with someone very early this morning, actually, about how, sometimes what they will do is fatten up the cattle in a spiritual sense, occasionally propping up, groups of people, whether it's on a smaller level or on a massive scale, in one way or another, for the purposes of having them be destroyed so that they can express this suffering. And this is literally the nourishment for that which most people would describe as the dark side of things, the reptilians, the aliens, the elite, which are not quite human to some people, et cetera, et cetera. But literally, that is what they feed on, and they create these situations, sometimes in a short-term sense, but often in a long-term sense, like you're describing, for the purposes of having something to feed on.
Yeah, and that's exactly the nourishment that this biosphere, this aquarium, is furnishing to these lower astral beings that are actually in control of the aquarium.
Right.
And the way out, as I said, is the way in. And I've traveled this road consciously quite a number of times in my lifetime. And just to come back to the to how much the planet has changed, back in the mid '60s, I traveled North Africa, and at that time there was no such thing as terrorism. It was more of a cultural exchange, a learning, a studying another culture. There was no threat as such. And you look now, and the new boogeyman is Islam. And they've introduced it in such a way that it's actually disrupting the Christian society, the Christian-based society of Europe. And you can start to see now how they're going to use that. And already there's like some inner fightings. I was speaking to some friends in Sweden recently, and I used to go to a place called Malmö. I used to do some hockey games there. And nice town, nice people. Now he told me, I haven't been there in a number of years, he told me now that the police don't even go in certain areas of town. This is in Sweden. And it's starting now all over Europe. I mean, you saw recently what happened in Belgium, what happened in Paris, etc. But it's all staged. It's staged by world governments. And these world governments are influenced, whether consciously or unconsciously, by these implants that I'm talking about. And if you don't have an ability to either neutralize them, there are techniques that you can use to consciously rid yourself of the impressions to the mind that they give. There's no way out. This place will never get better. It doesn't make sense. And even imagine, Charles, for a second, okay, suddenly the wars stop, everything's cool, everybody's cooperating, everybody loves each other, there's abundance for everyone. But again, does it make sense? Lifespan 60, 70, 80 years? Now, if I may, this just triggered another aspect of life and death. If I asked you the question, what's the opposite of death, what would you tell me?
Well, the typical answer would be life, but I believe that death is more of an illusion than people understand, and it is about transition. And it's a transitional phase that is initiated when the body ceases to function.
Okay. Well, if you looked at it, I would say that the opposite of death is not life, but actually birth.
Okay.
And both birth and death happen in life. You see, birth and death is a duality. It's another form of duality. Whereas your essential nature is life. And it's independent of birth and death. So that's why I was saying, if you weren't life prior to birth, how would you know that you are?
Well, right. This to me is a temporary state that we are in, which people would describe as, being born, living, and then dying. It is not the beginning and the end. It's just a temporary condition.
Well,
to me.
It is and it isn't. Here's another element I'm going to introduce in the mix here. You've heard about people experiencing at the death a white light, and families are waiting for them up there, loved beings that they had encountered in their life.
Sure.
What if I told you that that's in fact a trap, a soul catcher to be recycled? And even a step further, a lot of people say, well, we come here, we reincarnate to learn something, to evolve. Okay?
Okay.
It doesn't work that way. I would say that reincarnation does exist, But the more you reincarnate, the deeper you get into the illusion. And there are some fresh souls from the causal that come to inform people that are either ready or not ready to hear it, in order for them to be able to go back home. And I assure you that there were texts that were that in the old text, I alluded to it before, the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where they specifically speak about bardos. And bardos were like levels that you had to be attentive to in order not to get trapped in them. They could be charming, colorful. Mm. And those are all part of the astral world. It's a very it can be very charming place.
Right.
So you have to beware not to get recycled over and over again, because each time you get recycled, and I've seen photographs from my friend Ronald inside orbs where you can actually see captured so-called souls. They're actually electromagnetic forms that are waiting and captured inside these orbs in order to be recycled in human bodies. And some of them were quite clear, quite clear. It made a huge impression, and he's refining his technique all the time. I know he's done some very interesting stuff on Carlos Diaz films recently that he showed me. And the story of what we're stuck in here is so beyond science fiction that it's almost unimaginable.
Well, now we've gone into an area which is difficult, honestly, for me to begin to wrap my mind around, because this concept of recycling and this concept of fresh souls emerging into the, well, for lack of a better word, the prison planet. This all gets rather confusing to me, to be honest with you.
What would you need clarified? How is it confusing?
Well, here's the thing. If you're continuously being recycled into this, and you have to consciously avoid these traps, it seems to me as though the consciousness shifts once it's decoupled from the sensory. Once it's decoupled from the body, you have a different way of perceiving things, and this I believe is observable. Anybody can do this.
Well, only if you were able to view from the next frequency field, because it's a little bit like you're wearing glasses and you're looking for them.
Oh, yeah, but this is the thing: the glasses, which were the body, is not accessible. So I could see that someone might just search for another pair of glasses, and if they find them, they put them on, and
either that or they're given to you.
Or they're given to you. I understand that, but how would one even begin to avoid that? Because it seems as though most people that I encounter have not avoided it.
Well, most of them aren't even aware of it. I mean, what we're talking about here, is beyond science fiction, but yet it's the structure of the universe that humanity is stuck in.
Well, aside from avoiding those traps, which would be rather alluring because there is a bit of disorientation one experiences in one way or another when transitioning, it appears to me. How do you? Are
you talking about going in between bodies?
Yeah, because there's a disorientation there.
Yeah, there is a disorientation, but you have to realize that you're still stuck in the initial illusion. See, the physical body only plays out the electromagnetic implant that you're living out as a personality, and you take yourself to be that. So in order to avoid that, what I'm saying is you have to now consciously begin to peel off the layers of illusion and identity until you get past at least the astral, but hopefully even beyond the causal, so that you can have a global perspective of what it is that you're stuck in.
Huh.
Because otherwise, if only you'll say, okay, well, when I die, I go to heaven, I go to hell, you're just going to be recycled, unless you have had the experience of that totality. And that totality is the perspective from which you can slip out of the astral plane. Because I remember very clearly and consciously when I traveled between the causal and the astral, the burning sensation that I had every time I went through that a type of fly screen that you have in the summer.
Right.
Now imagine being squeezed through there. And that's why people can't escape it, is that their frequency isn't refined enough to go through the screening. So you're captured. And you're recycled again, over and over again.
Well, that seems to me as though if I were to seek a solution in a physical sense through that screen, I would attempt to become something like steam or smoke, because that will travel through it.
Yeah, well, it's not quite like that in the sense that the causal plane has societies like we do here, but there's only harmony. There's no duality. There's that collaboration, that collective conscious collaboration. And it's not that, I don't know who I am anymore, and I don't have a sense of being a someone, because that's irrelevant at that frequency, because the bliss is total. It's a little bit like having honey on your tongue. Even if you put sugar on there, it won't make much of a difference, will it?
No, I can see what you're saying. It's just it's not easy to digest it, though, to be honest with you.
Well, it may not be easy, but it's a hell of a lot easier than having to put through to live through duality. And I don't feel. I hope people don't perceive this as a negative perspective, because that's not what it's meant to be. It's meant to be to look at things and see for yourself. Do you feel things here to be normal? And this, if it's yes, well then it's okay. And if it's not, then where do I begin to look in order to free myself from this sense of separation, from this sense of misery in some cases? And even as I speak to you with this, I don't feel depressed, I don't feel unhappy, because my sense of beingness coexists with the relativity that I'm engaged in temporarily here. So it's not conditional on being my identity, my full identity.
Okay. Well, that is interesting, and one would ask, after examining all this and taking this in, what is the path to solving this? What is the path to freeing the self, the individual?
The self is already free.
Mm-hmm.
It's the identity to the illusion of being what you're not that becomes the problem. And everything that's structured in our so-called society here on this earth is, from the get-go, you get engaged in the becoming process. Nobody teaches you to be or to remind yourself of your beingness, but everything becomes becomingness. Okay, so what am I going to do when I'm older? The job, the 9 to 5 BS that is basically an endless process. And you hope that you get like your 2 weeks or 3 weeks holidays a year, and then you dream of. It's not that there's no beauty here, because if there was no beauty, nothing enticing, people would just give up. But when you look at it, okay, so then you save up some money and you go for your dream trip to Hawaii, but is that enough? It's like 3 weeks, and then you go back to slavery. Some of the taxes in Europe are so high that until from January to July 15th, you work for the system that uses the money in turn to destroy societies or other societies. What bloody sense does that make? I mean, at what point do people wake up and say, hey, what are we doing?
Well, they've hidden the taxes here, but the same percentage essentially prevails, although on paper it appears as though it's less intrusive into one's income. But even someone with a steady job really realistically works half of the year to give this money to these establishments that are engaged in exactly what you're talking about, which is the destruction and suppression and oppression of life in some way or another. That's realistically what it is that you're contributing to while attempting to support oneself and one's own family. That's the choice, the illusion that you have is that, well, that's what you're doing most of the time. But once engaged in the financial system, what your understanding is that really you're occupied with contributing to a great many things that you would refuse to contribute to had you been given the choice. You know,
basically, you're financing your own slavery.
Yes, as a constant though, and the alternatives are rather bleak.
Well, the only alternative, which I said, is that until people wake up to what it is that we are living in, and that there's enough people to reach a critical mass. That doesn't mean it has to be 100%, but a critical mass, I don't know how many percent, but enough to say, hey, this doesn't work. And what I'm concerned about is that they're going to start changing the paradigm into something to make it look a little more cosmic so that we're engaged again for a couple of hundred years more into another set of illusions, and the same souls are going to be recycled and recycled and recycled.
No, I have that concern as well, that as people become more aware, more than awake, but as they become more aware of the details of what I do consider slavery as well, when people become more aware of it, what they will do is seek to mask it better, seek to obfuscate the reality a bit. But in truth, the essence of the order of things, if you will, is unchanged. They've simply applied a new coat of paint, and maybe they've turned they've given pretty colors to certain things.
They give false hope,
right,
to maintain the state of ignorance that will perpetuate itself into how long, I don't even know, like time-wise from a human perspective. And until you turn around and you come back home, there's no chance. And that's why I said that they have purposefully created a model of the earth to be round so that no matter where you go, you come back to the same place. Or if you look into space and you hope that one day you're going to colonize somewhere else, it's an illusion, because you never attain it. They've got these concepts of 1 trillion light years away, and then the imagination goes into a place that is unattainable. And yet, if reality was seen the way that it actually is, you would be able to turn your attention inward to the journey back home, and and it's not like, the absolute is a one big black empty hole. It's got nothing like that. It's a fulfillment. It's a totality. And there are societies that exist in a subtler relative sense, which are blissful societies. I know it. I've been there a number of times, even in this time frame. So it's not that what I'm talking about is non-existent or, nirvana, whatever. It's a reality, and it's as close to you as your own breath.
Well, see, and what's odd about that, though, is I've heard the argument, let's just say, that at this point in time, we as a species are not prepared for that.
Of course not.
Do, you know, and not. I mean, literally that we could not. The reason why we don't attain it is because we are not capable,
Yeah, well,
given our conditioning right now.
If you believe that, then you've already structured your future.
Well, I'm saying that I've heard that argument. I'm not saying that I believe it.
No, I'm not saying you personally. When I say you, we're speaking to the listenership,
Right.
and it doesn't mean that everybody out there may be in that mode. And you know, there could be a lot of people listening in that are free, and but I think what's been important today is the amount of various data that we've injected into the conversation. But all of what I said is not all about doom and gloom. It's to give a perspective of what's needed to go back to attain that inner freedom, to go back home, so to speak. And you can even live out, you know, whatever years you may have left in the can in a conscious state, so that when in fact your biological time has expired, that you don't get stuck for another recycling, because it won't get any better, and it has never changed. And I don't think it will ever change. Not here. What you're looking for is not here.
You know, but at the same time, here now I do speak for myself. I have the understanding that the reality is this: the possibilities are without limit. We can attain much higher levels of being. We can become part of greater societies. We can be a lot more than we appear to be at this time, because we already are. We merely have to lift the limitations.
You have to tune in. You have to tune in.
Well, there's another way to look at it, but that's a way of lifting the limitations which either have been placed upon us or we have placed upon ourselves. And that is how I see this whole thing. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm thinking that everything is doomed either. Believe me, this is never one of the things that I like to ascribe to, even in the most simplistic sense. When we talk about the things that are arrayed against individuals or populations that are detrimental in one way or another, no matter how seemingly insurmountable the structure is, you know, no matter how large, no matter how well backed, or seemingly, like I said, just completely insurmountable, insuperable by the individual, I always like to impart to people that no matter what, you as an individual have the ability to change this. And so do I, and so do us all have the ability to change what is happening. Now, it may be for the better, it may be for the worse. You never can tell.
And when you suggest this change, Charles, in what direction are you pointing?
Well, my hope is that I am pointing in a direction that will allow all of us to embrace the freedom which we already have, and to begin to actually enjoy that, if you will. That sounds like a convoluted answer, but I think you understand what I mean.
I understand you, yeah. And what I would answer to that is, you are correct in the way that you're stating it. If and when that actually takes place in enough people, I can assure you that this frequency here will no longer be necessary.
Right. Well, I would rather not say if and when. In fact, I always say it will. It will, it has, and it shall be, but As far as a timeline goes, I have no clue, but it will occur.
Well, what we're looking for is, yeah,
I just really do hope that it doesn't take you know, a very long time. I hope that it's just around the corner, but it will happen.
yeah,
Uh,
but it will happen, but not here, not in the way that people want to perpetuate their finite existence in a frequency that creates and maintains duality. Because duality always ends up in suffering.
mm,
I used to think that it would have been possible, but the more I went inside and observed outside, I don't see the purpose or the point of maintaining a promise of hope for 50, 60, 70 years, in some cases 15 years, 5 years, 2 years. For me, I just can no longer buy in to perpetuating the illusion of what it is that humans are stuck in. And that was part of the purpose of me coming on here today, if for nothing more than redirecting the attention in an opposite direction of where people are going.
mm.
Because the longer you maintain that direction, it's endless. You had the Romans, you had the Huns, you had World War One, World War Two, economic wars. When does it get better? And people have talked. Oh no, there were yugas. The Hindus used to speak about Sat Yuga. Sat Yuga doesn't exist on planet Earth. Sat Yuga is the causal plane.
Mm. Yeah, I think this is the misinterpretation with a lot of these ancient texts where they describe certain things that exist that people say that there is no evidence for, or there is no possibility that it occurred in the way that it's described. I think that sometimes what is missed is that it may not necessarily be a description of something that occurred on this particular plane, and I've always found that the various spiritual disciplines, the various spiritual dogmatic systems, all of them, in fact, contain elements of the truth in one way or another. And I think that that is one of those things that is often missed when people say, well, it's impossible for someone to have lived hundreds of years. It's impossible for someone to have traveled this way, that way, the third way. How do you speak to a burning bush, et cetera, et cetera? I think if you simply go through the exercise in your mind of understanding that it didn't necessarily have to have occurred on this particular frequency.
Yeah, and I think when you say it that way, uh, I support your perception on that 100%. And people have to realize that it's not that you do. You see, you live simultaneously all of these levels. You are an absolute body now. You are a causal body now. You are an astral body now. You are a physical form now. It's not that, you let go of one so that later you go into another. They live simultaneously. But the key is, where are you viewing it from? Are you viewing it strictly from the physical, where you're stuck and your everyday reality is survival? That's the projection of your implant into a physical form. If you're viewing it from the causal, then you have a little bit more of a chance, because you're seeing that the lower reality no longer binds you, so you can coexist. Preferably, if you're viewing it consciously from the perspective of source or totality, then everything coexists in a harmonious way, despite the fact that you're here. But that doesn't prevent you from being blind to the ignorance and not acting on it.
Mm. Well, you know, we are just about out of time for what would be the 2-hour show. But I do want to give you like a couple of minutes here to sort of give people a parting thought about what we've discussed today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this. And I hope I didn't tax you too much with some of my simplistic questions.
No, there was nothing simplistic. I really appreciated your feedback and your intelligence in understanding what can be a little bit complex until you become a little more familiar with the vocabularies, if you wish. So I thank you for having supported me through these 2 very pleasant hours, and hopefully this can help someone that's sensing that something's not right or they're looking for a direction, and to send them back home. So I really thank you for this opportunity. It meant a lot to me because it was something that I wanted to share somewhere, and I know that your network has got a lot of top quality people, and you're certainly one of the ones that I've met where I could call a top quality individual. So thank you again.
Well, I do appreciate that, and I want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen, and hopefully you have considered, at the very least, something new today, because no matter what, and I've discovered this over time, no matter what I believe I know, and let's remove the word belief, as Mr. Jessop did describe several times and instruct us to do, let's remove the word belief. As I know, okay, I need to start using that word when I actually know something. When I know that the possibilities are there, when I know that there is something far beyond that which is observable easily, I need to embrace that. And I hope that you listening will at the very least make the effort to do the same, because I think that's the first step in not repeating the cycle. And once again, Bruce Jessop, who did produce a movie called Fast Talkers, excuse me, right?
Fast Walkers.
Fast Walkers. I got lost there for a second. Fast Walkers, one word, and you can find that at fastwalkers.com, and also the other .com, which you or excuse me, the .eu page that you mentioned.
Yeah, safespace.eu. Yeah,
we probably
space. Yeah, safespace.eu, but we probably did Fast Walkers, and we were Fast Talkers as well today, so it fits.
And a lot of information here. And once again, thank you for taking the time to go through this with us. And well, we'll be back another day to continue, hopefully giving you many other things to consider. And who knows, maybe after we get some feedback from this show, Mr. Jessop will return and answer your questions, which I do always encourage you guys to send to me. You can reach me on Skype. Many of you know how to do that. If you don't want to do that, I'm also the radio show group on Facebook, or at ochelli.com. You can leave messages there, feedback, and I'm very sure that if we have a considerable amount of feedback from this show, that Mr. Jessop would be happy to return and answer those questions and queries that you would pose. So feel free to do so, because I think the more that we enlighten others and the more that we seek enlightenment for ourselves, which I do believe is part of the same process, the better chances we will have to not continue the cycles which we all are perceiving are just not quite right.